Hello. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about arrays, one-dimensional arrays to be precise. To begin, let's review how to create a simple array. Recall that an array is a homogeneous collection, meaning it contains the same type of thing. And we're going to use the bracket notation to denote that I don't want just an integer here, but I actually want an array of integers. I'm going to call this simple example nums, and I'm going to fill it up. Let's say we want this one to be of size 20. And then we're just going to fill it up with some random numbers. Now we could access the nums array like so and store in different values by using the index. And I can not only write, but I can also read by using this index notation. So a very simple program. I'm going to allocate an array of integers of size 20, so it'll be large enough to hold 20 integers. I'm going to fill in the first two cells. Remember that we start with the 0th index, and then I'm going to print out the 0th index. If I run this, then you'll see that we get the value 42 printed out, which is what's stored in the 0th spot. Okay, so let's delete that and actually fill in our numbers array with some random values. To do that, I'm going to create a new random, and we're getting an error here, so just right click on that and fix imports to bring in the Java util random package. And let's do a simple loop between 0 and 19. And what I'm going to do in this loop is just fill in the nums array at the ith location with the next and what I'm going to do inside of this loop is fill in the nums array at the ith position with the next integer with a maximum of 9. So I'm going to use the next integer or next int method on the random class to fill in this array of 20 numbers. In fact, that's all I need to do there. And then let's print it out. So we'll do system.out.print this time of nums some index. And the reason I'm doing this is I want all of my numbers to appear on a single line. And then we can do our println after I do my loop. So we're going to declare the array here. I'm then going to fill it in with some random numbers. In a for loop, I'm going to then display all of my numbers out to the screen. And if we run this, what we'll get is 20 numbers between 0 and 9, all displayed on the same line. In addition to declaring the integer array like so, I could also declare it like this, using my curly bracket notation. Notice I'm still using an integer array, and I'm giving the array a name, but instead of declaring the size explicitly, the size will be implicit in these curly brackets. I can actually store the values that I'd like. Okay, so this would be an array of size 6 because I'm putting in 6 different values into it. I'm going to repeat my array here, or my loop, rather, and this time I'll print out my new nums. Okay, so I'm declaring the array new nums, and I'm also filling it in with values at the same time. And then I'm just going to print out the results. So if we hit F6 to run this, we get our initial array that's printed out and dealt with up here, and then we get our new array. Notice that all of the values are placed into the right spot according to their position in these curly brackets. Let's do something other interesting as well. on my numbers. I'm going to delete this and just go with my random numbers here. Let's actually display, let's modify this array and reverse the numbers. So let's go from 0 less than, in this case, 10, because I'm only going to need to process the first half of the array, and in so doing I'll actually process the last half of the array. So what I'd like to do is take the first value in the array and the last value of the array and swap them. And then I'd like to take the second value of the array and the second to last value of the array and swap them. And then the third value in the array and the third to last value in the array and swap those. And if I keep doing that, in this case 10 times, representing the first half of the array, then I'm processing the first half of the array and swapping that with the last half of the array. In order to do the swap, I'm going to need a temporary variable called temp outside of the loop, and I'm going to say that temp is equal to nums sub I. So I'm going to pull out the ith value in the array and store that into temp. And then I'm going to say that nums sub I is equal to nums sub 19 minus I. And I'm going to do 19 minus I rather than 20 minus I because initially I is 0. So the nums of 19 minus I, where I is 0, would be nums of 19. If I were to say nums of 20, I would have a problem there because the nums of 20 is outside of the bounds of the array. So then I can say nums of 19 minus I is equal to temp. What this will do is it'll actually swap the first time through the loop I is 0, so nums of 0 is the first value, and then I'm going to take nums of 19 and place it into nums of 0, and then nums of 19 gets temp, so that will do the swap. And then I'm going to repeat the loop, and I would be 1 this time, so temp would be nums of 1. Nums of 1 is going to get nums of 18, which would be the second to last, and then nums of 18 is going to get temp, which in this case was what we pulled out here in nums 1. So that's going to swap the second and the second to last values. Okay, so let's say numbers initially, and I want to print my array again after I've swapped things about. So I'm just going to do a cut and paste here after the reverse process. This will effectively reverse the array. Okay, so here is the filling of the array with random values, printing out that initial array, doing some swapping on them, and then here this is the display of the values afterwards, after we've done the reverse. Okay, so we run this, and we see the numbers initially are 2, 3, 0, 5, 1, 6, 6, 5, 1, 2, and so on. And if we look at the numbers after the reverse process, we see this 4 and this 2 have been swapped, 4 and 2, and 7 and 3 have been swapped, so the 7 goes to here and the 3 goes to here, and this 4 and this 0 have been swapped. So if we start reading in this direction, 4, 7, 4, 4, 7, 5, 8, 5, 8, and we read in the reverse direction here, 4, 7, 4, 4, 7, 5, 8, 5, and so on, we see that this manipulation here in this loop have actually reversed the array. It's quite nice. Okay, not to leave you with the impression that we can only process arrays of integers, let's create an array of candy bars, just to show that we can create an array of complex objects as well. To do that, I'm going to right-click in my project space and open an existing project. I'm going to open my CSE 1302-0102, and this is the last one in the previous tutorial where we have our candy bar defined. I'm just going to take that candy bar and drag it down here into my project, but I'm going to hold down the control key at the same time, and that's going to put the plus there, which means it's going to copy it into this project rather than move it. So that way we're not stealing it out of this project. We'll go ahead and do refactor and bring it in, and what that's going to do is it's going to put the candy bar here in the package for CSE 1302-0201. And we can close out the CSE 1301-02. That's the previous project from the previous tutorial. And now our array project also has access to the candy bar class. Now that we have the candy bar class within our project, we can create an array of candy bars. And if you recall, the format to create an array is we specify the type of thing that we want to hold in the array. In this case, I want to hold a candy bar in my array, and we'll just use our brackets to denote that it's an array of candy bar. Let's call it treats is equal to a new candy bar array. And let's say we're going to hold 10 candy bars here. Okay, and then I can just say something like treats of 0 is equal to a new candy bar. Let's call it yummy. And it's got 300 calories, it weighs 2.1 ounces, and it costs, let's say, 70 cents. I could say treats of 1 is equal to a new candy bar. I'll call this one Bleck, because it has 800 calories, it's 8 ounces, and it costs $10. Okay? And since the candy bar class has the toString function defined, I can say something like system.out.println of treats sub 1, and that means that the output is going to take this candy bar and display it. So let's run, and you'll see that the static method that we have when we create the candy bar is being created for both of these two candy bars we've created. And then this is that final display for printing out treats of 1. So that's that second candy bar that we have in our array. So that just confirms that not only can we create integer arrays or arrays of built-in simple types, but we can also create arrays of more complicated types. Okay, now let's actually take all of this out. I want to focus on a different type of project with arrays. You could save that and create a new project if you'd like. But I'd like to create a project using arrays that store sales information for our candy bars. We're going to manufacture all these candy bars and we're going to sell them, so let's have a program that uses an array to store the sales information. To begin with, I'm going to need to be able to read in information from the user. So I'm going to create a new scanner that is bound to system.in. So we'll be able to read information in from the user. And I want to store information about sales volume. So since sales are typically in dollars, we'll have an array of double. And I'll call this array sales volume. And I'm going to create 4 different regions. So my array will be of size 4 on the double type. I'm going to create a string array called region string. And actually, rather than allocate it, let's fill it in with our default. The first region will be west, the next will be mountain, the next will be central, and the final region will be east. Okay? And what I'd like to do then is repeatedly ask the user for some information and then fill in this sales information based on the region and the sale that they type in. Let's go ahead and resolve this scanner by right-clicking and saying Fix Imports, and we'll use the Java util scanner package. Okay? Now, I'm going to use a do-while loop. So while I'm not done, I want to continue doing this loop. So let's create a Boolean and initialize it to false. And so long as I'm not done, just keep processing information from the user here. So what I'll do is I will ask the user using a system.out.print, enter region for the sale, and we'll say 1 is west, 2 is mountain, 3 is central, and 4 is east, and we'll say that 0 is done, meaning they don't want to type in any more information. Okay, so we're going to tell the user we're going to ask the user for a region, and then we're going to get that information from them. So the region is going to be from the scanner, and we want the next integer. So we're going to read in an integer from the user, and we're going to store that into this variable region. So now we need to define that. No problem. So we'll create an integer region. And if the region is equal to 0, that means that they told us that they're done. So we're going to say done is equal to true. Otherwise, if the region is greater than or equal to 1, and the region is less than or equal to 4, that means they've given us a valid region. They gave me a 1, 2, 3, or 4. In which case, now I'd like to ask them how much sales were sold at this region. So let's do a system.out.print and ask for the sale amount. So we'll read that in from the user using our scanner again, and we'll get a next double this time. So we're going to read in the sale, and that implies we need to have a sale amount variable, so we'll go ahead and define that up here outside of the loop. And at this point we have asked the user for a region, and they gave us a region between 1 and 4, so we asked them how much sales was done in that region there. And we can increase our sales volume, which is our array here, of the region that the user just specified, west, mountain, central, or east, and we're going to increase that by the sale amount. So if the user typed in 1, and then they typed in 500, we're going to add $500 to the sales volume of region 1. Well, the trouble with this is that we're prompting the user for 1, 2, 3, and 4 for west, mountain, central, and east, but you'll notice that since our arrays start with 0 index, west is actually 0. So we need to subtract 1 from what the user types. And this is an important distinction in working with arrays and also asking the user to prompt them for information. You're going to have an off by 1 error if you don't subtract this 1 out, because what the user sees, 1, 2, 3, and 4, is different from what the array sees, and the array's indices are 0, 1, 2, and 3. So if we just subtract 1, then we're going to get a really nice mapping between what the user is typing and the index that is proper to the different region. Okay, so at this point we've got our do-while loop. So long as we're not done, we're going to keep repeatedly asking the user for what region, and then if they give us a valid region, we'll ask them for a sales amount, and we'll increase the sales volume value in this array by how much the user types in. Now that we're done with that, let's go ahead and run this and see what it's going to look like. Okay, so hit F6 or click the run button, and you come down here and it's asking us for a region. So let's say that the mountain region, we'll type in 2 there, and now it's asking us for our sale amount. Let's say we did $900 in sales, and the do-while loop is repeating now. Let's say it was a central region, and the sales amount was $190.99. Notice we're doing a get double there, so we can type in currency values, no problem. And let's say that the central region did another $1,000 in sales. And when we're done typing in information, we can type 0, and then our program finishes. Well, let's do one final addition to our program and actually have it display the information for us. So let's do a simple loop between 0 and 4 here, and do a system out println that the volume for region, and we have our region string here. So we're going to refer to our region string. In this case it'll be west, mountain, central, or east. Is And we have our sales volume. And so this is going to loop for 0 to 3 and print out the region, and then print out the total sales that was done in that region based on all of the summation here. Alright, so let's run this. And if we type in sales information again, let's go back into the West region and do another $1,000 in sales. In the East region, let's do $30 in sales. And when we're done, notice that we haven't put anything in for the mountain region, so that should be by default 0. So let's say we're done here. Volume for the region West is 1,800. The mountain is 0, because we didn't type anything there. Central and East are 230 respectively. So very nice. We've got a nice way of reading information and also displaying it back out. Well, what about finding the region that has the smallest sales volume? So let's add in a new loop that's going to calculate the lowest performing region. To do that, I'm going to need the lowest performing index, which will be the index into my array, and I'll initialize that to 0. And then let's start a loop going from 1. Notice I'm using 1 because I'm already presuming that the 0th region is the worst performing region. And if the sales volume in the ith region is worse than the sales volume in the lowest performing index, then I've got a new worst region. So the lowest performing region is going to be equal to I. So I'm going to do a loop over the entire lowest performing index, is going to be equal to I. So we're going to do a loop over the entire array of sales volume and try to find the index within the array that has the smallest value. And then when I'm done with this, I can say the lowest performing region and look into my region string and look at that lowest performing index and pull out that string. We had sales of, and then look at the sales volume of that lowest performing index. Okay, so we're going to figure out here which region had the worst sales and find that index into the array, and then we're going to display that back out to the user here. Okay, let's run this and come down here. Let's say that the West had sales of 400, the mountain region had sales of 800, and the East had sales of 1,000, but the Central had sales of 100. If I go in and continue on, that's no problem. It'll just keep adding up. But if I say 0 here, then by this we should see that the Central region had the worst sales. And you can see the results being displayed out here, and you can also see that we actually found that the Central had a sales of 100, and that was the lowest performing region. So this all looks good right now, but the problem is, it's all functional and everything works, and you should see how arrays work, but this main method is really kind of ugly. It's doing quite a lot of things. All of this code is all in one spot. And what I'd like to do now is look for the output to be exactly the same and have the program run exactly as it did. But let's create separate methods for each one of these tasks that we have going in our program. So up here we've got a task that's looking to get the information from the user. We have a task about displaying all of the information in the array, and we have another task down here that's involved with finding the lowest performing region. So let's create a new method down here at the bottom. This is outside of main, but still within the class. And let's create a public static void method called determine lowest. And the purpose of this method is going to be to determine the lowest performing region, just like we're doing in that last 10 lines or so of this code. In order to pull this off, we're going to have to pass in the array, and we're also going to have to pass in the array for the labels. If you look at the work that's being done in that bottom piece of the code here in main, what I'd like to do is take this region right here and extract that out. So I'm just going to cut and paste it down here into this new method called determine lowest, and it's using the sales volume and the region string arrays. So I'm going to pass those in as values and labels, just showing that we can pass in arrays into methods. So I'm going to call this values now instead. Okay. So I'm just renaming them here locally, and instead of region string, I'm going to call that the labels. So the code is fine now, if I can spell. There we are. Okay. And in order to make this method actually do its work, I need to actually invoke it. So I've defined it here, and now I want to invoke it here. I'm going to pass it the sales volume array and also the region string from here. Okay, so instead of having that code inside of main, I've now got this determine lowest method that I'm calling right here, and I'm defining it down here. So we're going to create a bit of abstraction, and I'll just put in a comment here that denotes that we've got a separate main from this method. If we run this, let's say that the west did sales of 100, that mountain did sales of 400, that the east did sales of 1,000, and that central did sales of 50. And if we say we're done, then it shows us our volume information, and it finds that the lowest performing region was central. So everything's working just as it should. The improvement we made is now this work to determine the lowest performing region is abstracted into a separate method. Main is still a little bit ugly because it's still doing more than one thing. So let's look at pulling out this information about getting the information, this sales information, and putting that also into a separate method. Now the intent of this area of code is to actually fill in the array with values. So I'm going to create a public static method, but this time the return value is going to be of type array. So the intent of this function is to get the sales information and return it back to the user. So if we come up here, I'm going to pull out all of this, starting with the definition of my array. Actually, let's start here with starting with the Boolean and the do while, and pull that out and place it into this function get sales. And now it's complaining it doesn't know what region is or SC is or any of that. So let's take our scanner, and we're going to need the region and the sales information. So I'm going to cut that down now, which is the variables section. And now the scanner is recognized in sales volume and region string. The trouble with this is I don't want, I'll need my region and my sales amount, but I don't really need the region string in this function. So let's move him back up here into main. Notice that main's getting quite small, which is a good thing. That's the intent of our action here. So I've got my scanner, I've got my region, my sales amount. This sales volume I'm going to rename results because that's the intent of this function. And that should give me everything I need here. Now, instead of sales volume of region -1, I'm going to say results. And when the do while loop is finished, I'm going to return the results. Okay, so here's this method get sales, whose job it is to return a double array, showing that we can return arrays as values out of a method. It's going to set everything up. It's going to do my do while loop. I've renamed the array here to the results, and when we're done, we're just going to return that back. Okay, so up here in main then, I still need my double array called sales volume, but I'm not going to create anything with the new command here. I'm actually going to leave that blank, and then I'm going to say that sales volume is equal to get sales. So I'm going to invoke this method get sales here, and the sales volume array will be filled in with results from this method. Okay, so let's run. Remember, we're expecting the exact same performance. So let's say that the West did 200 in sales, and the East did 100 in sales, and Central did $1,000 in sales. If we're done, then we'll notice that everything is still working as we would like, which is quite nice because the get sales is now a separate method. All of this work of the do while and reading any information from the user has been abstracted into this method, and our main function is getting quite clean now. We just set up our variables, we get the sales information, we display it out, and then we determine the lowest. So you might say, well, why don't we just abstract this out here? This is another activity that we could do. So that'll be what we do next. And we'll call this, it's going to be public static void display array. We're going to take in a double array called sales, and then a string array called region string, or labels, whatever you'd like to call it there. Let's paste this, or cut it and put it down here inside of the method we just did. Rename this to sales and leave it alone. That's all we need to do. So we'll get the sales, we'll display array by passing in sales volume and the region string. And now main is actually quite small because I've got a method called display array whose job it is to display the information. I have the get sales, whose job it is to read in the information from the user, and then I've got a method determine lowest, whose job it is to figure out which region had the lowest sales. So let's run this one more time. Let's say that West did 100 in sales and Central did 800 in sales, and we'll leave it at that, and I'll show you something interesting here as well. We get good behavior, which is exactly what we want. Notice that the Mountain and the East both did zeros in sales, but our lowest performing method only looks at the first occurrence, so it's going to say that the Mountain region was the worst, even though it tied with the East. And that's okay, that's how it was even before we created the separate methods. Okay. One last thing I'd like to show you that we can do is we can modify an array by passing it in. Here in the display array, I took in the sales and the region string, but I'm not changing them, I'm just reading from them. And here in the get sales, I am generating an array and returning it as a value. The determine lowest is also just reading from these. So let's create one final method that is actually going to modify my array. It's going to be a public static void function, and I'm going to call this make big sale. And what's going to happen with this is I'm going to take in the double array of sales, and I want to say that if I invoke this method make big sale, I'm going to generate $1,000 in sales for all of the regions. So for int region 0, region less than 4, region plus plus, and I'm going to say that the sales of region plus equal 1,000. Okay, so our sales array comes in, and I'm going to iterate between 0 and 3 and add 1,000 to every value. Now you might say I'm not passing this by reference, so it shouldn't be able to modify it. But what's actually going to happen is anytime I pass in an array, it's a reference type. So if I modify the array inside of the function, then the changes are persistent. So up here, why don't we do a system.out.println. This is the sales before, or the values before the big sale. And we'll display it. And then I'm going to make a big sale on my sales volume, and then display the results again. values after the big sale. And we should see that everything should go up by 1,000. Notice up here in main, though, I'm just invoking this make big sale method. So I'm not actually changing the values here, I'll be changing the values inside of this method. So let's run this and see what we get. Let's say that West did 200 in sales, that East did $100 in sales, and Mountain did $500 in sales. We'll leave it at that. So what we should get is 200, 100, 500, and 0 for the West and the East and the Mountain and the Central respectively. So we've got our 200, 500, 0, and 100. After the big sale, notice everything has gone up by 1,000 because that make big sale method adds 1,000 to everything. Okay, so based on this tutorial, you should have a good solid understanding of arrays, how to declare simple arrays with built-in data types such as the double, string, and int, as well as how to create arrays of your own data types, such as the candy bar that we did earlier. You should also understand how to modify arrays by passing them in and adjusting the values, and understand that those changes are persistent when that method is finished. You should know how to pass an array in for reading and displaying the values inside of an array. And you should understand how to return an array outside of a method when it's finished. Lastly, we can do a simple search and find the minimum inside of an array. And this final example that we have has a nice structure to the main function. It's doing all of its work at an abstract level and calling functions like getSales, displayArray, makeBigSale, and determineLowest. So you should understand how to pass arrays back and forth inside of methods.